Hi, I'm Saima Farouk, and I'm here talking with Heidi Sawyer, author of Highly Intuitive People, about self-mastery. Hi, Heidi. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
So, Heidi, the subject of self-mastery, let's start at the beginning. What is self-mastery?
Welcome to the Sensitive Mind Show.
Your purpose in life as a sensitive is to experience the deeper parts of the mind, to move beyond fear and to manage your energy, no matter the circumstance. I'm going to show you, as a sensitive, how you can maximize your talents and feel comfortable in your own skin. For show notes and to join the conversation, visit heidisawyer.com/mind. Well, different people would have different associations with how you would perceive self-mastery, but how I would look at it is self-mastery is about management of the ego. So learning how to manage how you work on an ego basis. So if we look at the ego as your everyday self, so your everyday world of how you operate, what your decisions are, how you mentally process things, what overtakes your life, the things that you find yourself, habits that you find yourself forming when you don't want to, the directions you find yourself going in, even though you know sometimes they're not good for you. All of those would be the efforts of the ego. Now, I would see it as those efforts of the ego are determined by previous life events. So I don't mean past life, I mean as in earlier life events. So things that have occurred earlier in your life. So some of those decisions that you've made earlier in your lifetime, but also some of those that you've inherited from your past. So from your parentage, from their habits, from the things that even pass through generations. So I think all of those have an impact on how we then look at things as far as the ego is concerned. So there comes a point, certainly in my view, as far as a person's development is concerned, in their internal development, where they can't move forward any further without an element of self-mastery, which is learning how to significantly manage their ego, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So is that managing how you look at things? Is it perception? Is it how you think? Is it managing your emotions? Is it all of that?
Well, the ego is, in the way that I'm looking at it, okay, so the way that I'm sort of defining this area, has its focus is a fixed outcome. Okay, so it gets attached to outcomes. So how do we get disappointed in life? Well, we get disappointed when the outcome that we've been fixed on hasn't occurred, it hasn't happened. So self-mastery is about learning an element of flexibility where we don't always have to fixate on certain outcomes in order to be happy. So it then becomes something that we naturally feel because we're not, happiness becomes something that we naturally feel because we're not so fixed to things having to be a certain way in order for us to be okay or in order for us to be happy. So things like, well, how do you manage the ego? What would you be looking at? Well, if you look at it along the lines of managing how you feel obliged to certain things in life. So lots of people do things out of obligation rather than choice. So, and when people do things out of obligation rather than choice, it creates resentment, it creates frustration. And all of those kinds of emotions are away from self-mastery. So when you're working to manage the ego, you then start to take action where you choose to take action. Okay, so obligation becomes a thing of the past because then you are assisting or you're being part of something because you want to be rather than that you feel obliged to be. And therefore you're doing it because you want to, therefore it steers you along the direction of a happier outcome or a happier life because you're not attached to to the outcome. So the outcome isn't then, oh, well, I'm obliged to do this, so once I've done it, then they should be happy with it. Or once I've done it, I will be exhausted, but at the same time, I've done what I was supposed to do, what I'm obliged to do, and I don't want to do anymore. So everything then becomes in life about resistance. Everything is about how do we negotiate around resistance in life. Whereas self-mastery, in terms of managing the ego, it means that everything can start to run in a way that's a lot more smooth, because you're not then always having, feeling as though you're trying to move away from something. You're actually moving towards things in life because everything is in flow, it's managed. So part of that as well is about self-mastery in terms of managing the ego. It's about managing your environment. So managing the environment that you want to be in, the people that you want to be around, managing your own environment. People don't realize, certainly as sensitives, that how much your environment has an impact on your well-being. Your environment as a sensitive has a massive impact on how you feel. So part of self-mastery is then feeling in control of that environment. And not feeling in control of that environment, but feeling in control of being able to make choices and in sync and things in flow with your own inner world, rather than always feeling that you're having to push against something in terms of a resistance, either internally or externally in the world.
Sounds like confidence.
Yes. Well, what is confidence? What is the definition of confidence? I think you could actually say confidence is active management of the ego. Yes. I think you could say that, because then you're not afraid that you're going to do something wrong or feel that you're wrong, because you have a management over what you would previously sort of see as an unconscious element of yourself.
And it almost also feels like it's a very, it's almost like a pathway to coming to that confidence, rather than just feeling angry about obligations and then blurting it out. So it's almost like coming into that place of confidence in a sort of like in a structured way. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it's also effortless. So then it doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, hang on, am I doing this right? It becomes more of a natural process, because you're not then, as I say, attached to their outcomes. You're not then fixated that I have to have it this way, or I have to be right, or I have to do it this, or I have to be less frustrated. It just comes as a natural process through the management of the ego.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about this as well with regards to a 110 year. So how should we handle self-mastery in a 110 year? Okay,
so I need to explain that a little bit before we kind of go into that. So we are in the year 2017, we are in what's called a 110 year. So a 110 year is how all the numbers add up together in 2017, and we come to a 1. Okay, so it's a 110. So what does it mean? Well, if we look at it in terms of the tree of life, you have the 1, it's the only number, it's the only numbered year that has 2 positions. Okay, so we have the 110 of our physical self, and we have the 110 of the whole self. And so that has a huge influence over how everyone will see things, as in the vibration of the year ahead. So how will people feel generally, whether their life code number is a 110 or it isn't a 110? Well, everybody will start to feel split. Okay, so they'll start to feel an internal and an external split between things. So feel that they're pushed in two different directions, or forced to make choices that feel as though they're in two different directions. Why? Because we have the 110 influence of the physical, and then we have the 110 influence of the whole self. So you could say that the 110 influence of the physical, so the body part, you could say that that's the ego. Mm-hmm. So the demands of the physical world, so the demands of our immediate environment. And then you could say the 110 of the whole self is more of what do we want? What do we want? As in, what's our long-term focus? What's the overall picture? What is it that we actually want? So rather than people reacting to the moment, which, most people do in life, they make decisions based on what's immediately coming towards them. This 110 year will start to force people to think in a deeper way, as in, what is the long-term outcome? What is the long-term view on something? So as far as someone's own sense of self is concerned, 2017, in terms of that 110 year, how do you focus on an element of self-mastery? It is obviously about coping with the demands of your everyday world, but at the same time, actually actively participating with a deeper connection with what do you actually want, or what are you doing it for? What is the reason behind it? Mm-hmm. So it's about then having the courage to step away from obligation and more into participation. So away from obligation, but into participation, which is two very different energies. Obligation is you're doing it almost backwards. Participation is you're doing it moving forwards.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to be really pertinent for people who are thinking at this time about goals and what they might be goal setting or thinking about where they want to take things, their next steps.
Yes, and when it comes to goal setting, I would say, rather than, especially in this 110 year, I would say rather than, kind of the standard, I need to lose weight, or I want to earn an extra whatever amount of money, I want to win the lottery, whatever it is that, there's kind of the standard things that people come out with as far as goals are concerned. So if we look at weight, okay, because that's always a big thing at this time of year, or will someone writes down a goal, I'm going to lose 12 pounds. Okay, so let's say that their goal is, I'm going to lose 12 pounds. Well, normally someone will just write down, I'm going to lose 12 pounds. That would be something very physical in the 110, because it would be, okay, well, if I follow these practical steps, if I diet, if I eat less sugar, if I exercise more, if I don't drink alcohol, I'll lose those 12 pounds. And so it becomes a sort of an effort of willpower. And you could say, well, then surely the self-mastery is, well, then, your willpower has won, because you then lose the 12 pounds. I'm saying to you, in a 110 year, what is really important is, okay, write down that you want to lose 12 pounds, but why? Mm-hmm. So it becomes something deeper. So you would then get to the deeper reason why you wanted to shed the 12 pounds. So the 12 pounds become something secondary to the primary reason. So a 110 year is about looking for your depth. And you can't often get to your depth without engaging with an element of self-mastery, which is management of the ego.
So looking for your why, and this is going to help with other areas such as motivation and procrastination as well. I assume that
But
looking.
also when, people want to change jobs and things like that, because that becomes a big thing. Sometimes
Yes.
people will say, well, what's my purpose? Shouldn't I want to be doing something different from what I'm doing? And, they would say their immediate why would be, well, because I don't like where I am. I don't like the restriction. I don't like having to get on a train first thing in the morning. I don't like the people I work with. All of those kind of things are quite often people's initial whys. But if you just briefly look at those are everything to be centered around the physical. What they're saying is they don't like their environment. So what I'm saying, even with those kind of goals, it's, oh, well, I don't like my environment, isn't enough in a 1-10 year. Your why has to be stronger. So maybe someone would then say, okay, well, I want to change my job. Why? Because I don't like the people I work with. That's not going to, that's very centered around the physicality. It's not going to change. In a 1-10 a year, it's not going to change without the why. So then it would be, maybe a person would ask the question deeper and say, well, why don't I like the people that I work with? And maybe it would be because I find the resistance too big to deal with. I find it tiring. I don't want to be dealing with the resistance anymore. And then I might say to themselves, well, why don't you change your job now? Well, I can't be certain that I can go and get another job where I'm going to earn the same money or more money. I haven't got the confidence to. All of that. Well, that is all resistance. So what that person is saying, they don't like the resistance in the people that they work with, but really they need to be looking at, they don't like the fact they don't like resistance in themselves. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise they would have changed their environment a lot sooner than now. Does that make sense? And in a 1-10 year, it gets really uncomfortable. It gets really uncomfortable without this element of mastering, the ego, or mastering the point at which you're starting to manage your communication with fear. Because self-mastery ultimately is about the management of fear.
Fantastic. So that brings us to the question of destiny. Does accessing your why help you access your destiny? And also, what's the difference between self-mastery and destiny?
Well, if you look at self-mastery as in management of the ego, okay, so your management of fear, because really, what's the ego? How do we interpret the ego? Well, ego is actually fear. Mm-hmm. So we'll say management of fear. Okay, so self-mastery is learning how to actively manage fear. Okay, so it doesn't manage you. Big difference in life. Destiny, where people would say, okay, so what is the definition of destiny? Well, if you looked at it in the dictionary, it would be the hidden power controlling life events. Okay, that perceived hidden power controlling life events, which then suggests that we have no hand in our own destiny. If that makes sense. We have no control over it. So we may as well go, oh, well, whatever. We'll just lie back and take whatever it is that life has decided is our destiny. And that's the assumption that we have no influence over our own life path. So if we look at it, though, that destiny, we do have influence over our life path. Okay, so if we look at it in terms of, well, what's destiny? Well, destiny is, you could say, it's the interaction of the soul. So with self-mastery, or certainly as far as the ego is concerned, and being in the management of fear, we're then looking at how do we manage the soul, or what is the soul communication. So destiny, I would say, is more about the soul communicating with you and you actually hearing it. So you then feel, oh, that's come out of the blue, because it feels more unconscious. Well, for most people, their soul interaction is unconscious. So when it starts to become more conscious, we then feel we're more on our destiny path, as in we feel more in keeping with the path that's presented in front of us. It feels right. Mm-hmm. It might be scary, but it feels right. So if we have management of the ego in terms of management of fear, it's much easier to hear our own destiny, because then we can choose that path rather than be afraid of it, because we're in control of fear rather than fear is in control of us. So in a 110 year, so going back to the whole 110 year, you could say that self-mastery is about the 110 in the physical, and you could say destiny is about the 110 as the whole self. So it's starting to have a communication. But you have to listen, you have to hear it, you have to be prepared to engage with it, because you can reject destiny. And many people do. They reject their destiny and may feel that it comes around later. But, that later could be 10 years' time. It could be 20 years' time. It could be 30 years' time. Whereas your destiny path, as in the soul communication, can be a lot quicker, a lot faster. Life can be a lot happier if we learn how to listen to it, to hear it. Because, destiny feels like a foregone conclusion.
Yes, that's right.
Well, the soul is a foregone conclusion. We forget that we are an essence of something, spirits having a physical experience. Mm-hmm. We think that often that we're the be all and end all as this human having a spirit, and we have to find this spirit, this essence of who we are. In actual fact, we're the other way around. We're a spirit having a human experience. And so the ego gets it switched. And when it's the wrong way round, we live half a life. When it's the right way round, we live our whole life. We live our life as the whole self. We live our life as an enriched experience, whether we're doing something amazing in life, or we're doing something that is simple but engaging and enjoyable, and is about participation, and is about growth. Because without our destiny, without a soul path, in my opinion, life is empty.
So how does destiny show up? Is it the same as coincidence?
I think you could define an increase in coincidence as in an increase in your ability to notice your destiny. Because when people are on a growth path, they notice coincidence. Or it seems to occur more, or it seems to be more helpful. And therefore, it feels like their destiny, because the coincidence is too obvious to ignore.
So self-mastery leads into all of what we talked about.
Well, I think there comes a point in someone's growth cycle where they have to, in order to feel that they can move to the next stage, the next part of their own sense of transformation, has to be where they learn how to manage the ego. Otherwise, the ego, every time it feels fear, or, let's say the communication with the soul, and it gets frightened, it's going to take a person away from themselves. It'll take them down a different path of self-destruction, or down a different path that feels like they're sabotaging their own growth. And it becomes deeply frustrating. They feel, then that's when people then start to feel really quite stuck. So there comes a point where, in my view, and again, this is in my view, it's one of those things where it resonates. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Is that you have to learn at some point or another to learn how to manage fear. And the only way, in my view, of really properly learning how to manage fear is actively participating within self-mastery in terms of managing the ego. It doesn't mean trying to control, because everyone knows that, however much self-control you have, at some point or another, the ego rebels and says, do you know what? Get stuffed. I'm not doing it that way. I don't want to do that. It feels contained. It feels restrictive. It feels unrealistic.
So when we've been talking about 2017, you've warned a little bit that to be careful this year of not falling into the victim vibration, and to stay closer to the whole self view. So it sounds to me like a self-mastery would be a perfect way to be able to do that.
Yes, because, or actively participating within that, because, without it, I think over this coming year, there will be a lot of examples of, in a 110 year, of the ego going wild. Okay, so fear going wild, the collective fear being very, very clear, and everyone running around headless chickens going, oh, screaming, what's happening, when it doesn't need to. Because a 110 year is also very much about new opportunities, new beginnings, and major new beginnings, massive opportunity, huge amounts of opportunity. But if you're running around like a headless chicken in fear, you're never going to see those opportunities.
And as sensitives, we're going to be picking up and processing fear around us, as well as our own apprehension.
Yes, but you could say that, or you could, or when, where fear is managed, you can observe that fear and go, oh, okay, this collective fear is the XYZ at the moment. This is what people are feeling. Then you can empathize with that, but it doesn't mean to say that you have to be involved with it. You can empathize with that experience, and you can think, oh gosh, that's unfortunate that they're in that space. But they're in that space because fear is controlling them. They're not controlling fear. And this year, in a 110 vibration, that is the big question. Are you controlling fear, or is fear controlling you? Because we're very, 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 very much in terms of the collective focus is in the physicality, is in that 110 vibration. And everything is about borders and boundaries. You'll see loads of that in a 110 year, about it being collective, in a collective space. But you'll also see it in terms of an internal space. So your borders, your boundaries in terms of your internal space is, whoa, hang on a second, where is fear appropriate? Rather than everything crashing over, marching over all of your internal boundaries and crushing it all into one big vast open space which feels unmanageable.
Great. So, Heidi, at this point, I want to know what the steps are that I can take. What's the practical way to move in to self-mastery?
Well, it depends in what you're saying to me. Are you saying that, Heidi, I really want to do this? Or are you saying, no, well, quite like this idea of learning how to manage my fear? Because I think there's two different ways of looking at it.
No, I'm saying that I absolutely want to be able to do what you describe, which is take a hold of what I can take a hold of, which is my inner world and my environment, and make that a priority in terms of the way that I'm managing that.
Okay.
So that my inner world is going crazy.
So how do you then make it into something that you can do in a practical way, which I think is something that is something that's key as far as that's concerned, especially in this 110. So things do have to be practical in this 110. Yeah. I think also you have to be conscious of the fact that when you go into really beginning to manage the ego, there's a huge amount of internal resistance. And there's a huge amount of internal resistance in terms of disassociation. So right at the beginning, right at the start of really begin to manage yourself, you then go, and then you find part of your inner world floating off and trying to sort of disengage from it. And that's the ego going into its own resistance. It's going into, whoa, I have to be the strongest in the room, so to speak. In the physical, I have to be the strongest in here. So it will kind of disassociate if you're learning how to manage it. So there are practical things, very practical things that you can do to start that journey so you don't disassociate, so that you really can participate within learning how to, the beginnings of self-mastery. And I would say some of those key things are, when I said managing your environment, one of the, and I say this, anyway, generally at this kind of time of year where it's something where people think, well, I'm beginning a new year, so I want to begin that in a good way. I think one of the first key things is, yes, the management of your environment and taking control of part of your environment that you can immediately control, as in it's immediately in your vicinity. So your personal space. So the management of your personal space. So you would then, as an example, you would pick one room in your home. So let's say you only have management over one room in your home, and let's say that's your bedroom. Okay, so you start with managing that environment. You look into that environment and see and feel what is out of kilter. What are you hanging on to? What are you keeping and why? And questioning yourself around it and saying, what are you hanging on to? What part of what you've got in that space makes you feel claustrophobic? What part makes you feel frustrated or uncomfortable? And it may not be immediately obvious, but if you ask yourself those questions from the deeper part of the whole self, you start to get answers. And you start to then give yourself the opportunity to change that. So that's beginning of managing, that element of your environment, which is pretty much, start to clear stuff out, but pick one room. And if you're afraid to get rid of stuff, then pick one cupboard or one drawer and start that internal questioning, because it will bring huge results. I mean, I've seen, as an example, people, when I was talked about self-mastery this time last year, where they've said that they did that. Okay, they cleared their immediate space out. I did a whole thing about what's in your wardrobe kind of stuff, and all of that thing about where you're storing certain things as how you're storing it in your internal world, and how people have then cleared stuff out, transformed their wardrobes, sent me pictures, all kinds of things, and had loads of stories of people then suddenly finding. We had one person who had a big gas and electricity bill, I think it was, reimbursed.
Wow.
Somebody else who won some money on the lottery. Somebody else who found several unexpected windfalls coming in. Another one where suddenly found that some relationship issues that they'd had suddenly found themselves resolving and becoming a lot more manageable. Somebody else said how they suddenly then found themselves able to communicate something that they'd been stuck with for forever, all because they pretty much cleaned out areas of their immediate personal space, so their bedroom, because that's an immediate personal space. It's the space that you sleep in. It's the space that your energy resets in. It's the space that actually, when people don't realize this, determines your sense of worth, your self-esteem, your confidence. Especially as a sensitive, massively influenced by that area of your environment. So even if you can't make it perfect, you can interact enough where it starts to build an internal management, and also where the ego then trusts you. You start to develop that trust. So I would say, that's one of those first steps. And then, then that's when you can then move on to, okay, other areas of your environment. Who do you interact with? What's the quality of that interaction? Why are those patterns there? Why do you have to, that's then really about the internal work. But I would say one key thing to do as far as beginning that process would be your confidence to interact with yourself over your immediate environment and questioning what is in your immediate personal space, and having the confidence to say, actually, you deserve for that to be compatible with you. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. Thank you so much, Heidi. As always, been a pleasure. Lots of useful information there, and I'm looking forward to starting clearing out my cupboards.
Excellent.
Now I know what to do and get that momentum going.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. For more great free content designed to support your purchase of my book, Highly Intuitive People, 7 Right Brain Traits to Change the Lives of Intuitive Sensitive People, please visit finallyfeelunderstood.com. There you can subscribe and download for free the meditation specific to today's episode. If you have already read the book, then it's time for you to receive exclusive access and support from me and your fellow intuitive sensitives as we go deeper together along this proven 7-step path by joining us in my monthly membership program called Heidi's Circle. There you can ask me anything in a safe and private environment, and I will answer you live. Join us today by visiting healmyinnerworld.com.